If you're earning more yet still feeling poor, then listen very carefully. I'm putting together a report called A Secret Life of a Consultant, and I just have this little outline here I'd like to share with you because this key concept coming up. A lot of professionals earn more today than they did 5 years ago, earn more today than they earned 10 years ago, yet they still feel poor. I'm Justin Hitt with Sustainable Wealth Secrets. We're going to talk really quick about this phenomena, about why you can earn more money yet still feel poor. You don't have the buying power that's necessary. You can't send your kids to better schools. You see the economy around you having challenges. You don't have the emergency fund that you need. You dreamed all your life growing up about making that $100,000 a year. And now that you earn six figures, it still doesn't have the buying power. Let's get down to the numbers. $100,000 in the 1980s was an income that puts you in the upper 5%, the upper 3% of wages in the United States. It bought for you a lifestyle, not just a living, but a lifestyle where you could afford to go on vacations, where you could afford to do things with your family. And in 1980s, this was what your parents dreamed about. This is what you maybe dreamed about. This was the life. And actually, you saw it portrayed in media and the movies. Well, let's fast forward to 2020, the year 2020. If you were going to make the equivalent of $100,000 a year in 1980, in the year 2020, you'd have to actually earn $319,000 a year. Yeah, that's right. You would have to been in the top 1% of salaries. Now, it's a logarithmic curve that as you get to the 10% and the 1%, it just starts climbing up. The tenth of a percent is where you've got people making millions of dollars a year. But today, if you're making $319,000 a year, you're in that 1%. You're in a situation that is not as reasonable as it was in the 1980s. Now, it's not impossible because I'm going to share with you some techniques and methods in order to earn $319,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, the equivalent of $1 million a year, if that's really where you're at, if you have the skill sets and the market has the demand. But essentially, that dream, $100,000 a year, to have the equivalent buying power today is $319,000. See, inflation really does suck. Inflation eats up your buying power. And I even challenge my clients to do the offer letter challenge. So the offer letter challenge is you pull out an offer letter. Maybe a few years ago, you got an offer letter for the job that you're in today, and you just run it through an inflation calculator. Now, you don't have to find a shadow inflation calculator. You can just use the basic calculator off of the government's website, and you can do the offer letter challenge, which is entering the year you were hired and the base salary that was offered. And the inflation calculator will tell you what the equivalent buying power is today. So, for example, $112,000 in 2017. Fast forward to 2020, that's $118,000 in 2020. The problem is the client I have in mind here only makes $115,000. So even though they've got raises each year, 2017 they got a raise, 2018 they got a raise, 2019 they got a raise, 2020 they got a raise, they're making more money from a dollar standpoint than they did because $115,000 is more than $112,000, but they've actually lost $3,000 in buying power. And that's because most businesses, most companies, they don't give employees inflation-adjusted raises. When I would do contracts, government contracts, we'd write into the contract an 8% cost of living allowance. It was actually an inflation adjustment rate, and it was 8%. Because if inflation is going up 2 or 3%, you're likely to have contributed overhead, taking that to almost 4%. And then the company still needs a margin, because if all you've done is increase the rate enough to cover the increase itself, your buying power of that margin has actually gone down. So we add another 4% for that, and it gives an overall 8% rate. Are you getting 8% raises every year? Yeah, see, I don't think so. I don't think so. In fact, with the 50% increase in food costs during the President Obama's administration, the COVID supply chain collapse and issues associated with that, you're in a position where if you're not getting 10 to 20% increases in salary. Now, you can also benefit from lowering taxes because taxes have gone up. You can benefit from tax shelters or different ways of approaching the income so that maybe you're not having to pay as much taxes in it. You can also shift some of your costs to pre-tax, like getting better medical coverage or your HSA account. There's a lot of ways of approaching it, but the reason why you might be earning more money today yet still feel poor is because the buying power is not there. It just doesn't exist anymore. Now, you've fallen into what's called the high income trap because your buying power is going to be significantly impacted by the things you buy. So if you got a bigger house, you're going to have bigger expenses. Those expenses are going to go up faster. If you've got a fancy car or you live in a city, prices in cities go up faster than places in rural communities. You may have had the opportunity to work from home. I've always worked from home. I've worked from home for 15, 20 years. I have a home office. I have a conference room. I live in a rural area, so my cost of livings are a little bit better. It still increases, don't get me wrong. But when you have to go back to work, you're going to realize that at home, you had a lot more flexibility. You had a lot more freedom. You were still working, and actually you're probably working longer hours, but you were able to spend a little bit more time with family. But you probably realized that you've fallen into this high income trap where you cannot leave the high income and retain the lifestyle that you have today. Now, you can downsize, you can cut back your lifestyle, but try telling that to your wife. Try telling that to your husband. Try telling your kids that they're going to have to go to a different school. And you may not want, for the sake of your children, to go to a lower income or a place where the houses are lower cost, because that house you have in McLean gives you access to the very best schools in the country. That private neighborhood that you live in, the nicer than average neighborhood that you live in, they generate more tax dollars, and those schools are much better. The thing of it is you dreamed of this lifestyle and you still weren't able to achieve it, even though you earn more. And now that trap's there, you're feeling like, I don't know what to do. And so in the back of your head, there's that escape, that dream of escape, freedom and independence. Well, nearly 65% of all employees, I think this is a Pew Research study, 65% of employees don't like their job. They don't want to be there. If they had a chance to get another job, they could. Now, part of the high income trap is it's hard to find six-figure jobs. You're making $250,000 a year. There aren't 100 $250,000 a year jobs that perfectly match what you're doing available. Now, we've got solutions for that we can talk about at another time, but do you understand what I'm talking about? You might have these dreams of escape. You might dream about freedom and independence. You might hope that one day you'll be able to save enough in retirement so that you can actually enjoy your life. Of course, you could take the other path, and this is not the path we recommend, but the other path is spend the hell out of your money, create a bunch of debt, and then figure it out later. But either way, it's a trap. And you're not the only one dreaming of escape. In fact, another study just came out, 40% of individuals who currently work at home, so these are professionals like you, they work at home during the COVID, they would rather quit than go back to the office. See, they've tasted the fruits. They've tasted the ability that if you're having a bad day, you can take a little walk around your house, or you could throw in a couple loads of laundry while you're working in your home office. And then when you're done with work, you're not only done with the laundry, but you're done with the work, and you didn't have to sit in a car for 45 minutes, and you can go have dinner with your family. See, this is that escape. It is possible. I'm going to show you how by the time we get to the end of this. And finally, it's not just on the side of the employee. Major employers right now are trying to outsource 25 to 50% of their professional white-collar roles. They realize that many of these jobs can be done from anywhere in the world. And the way the world works is there's talent all over the world. I've worked with people in Brazil, India, Ireland, China, UAW, No, United Arab Emirates. I've worked with people in like 70 different countries, and they are talented. They're just as talented as anybody else. But you can hire somebody from the Philippines for pennies on the dollar when it comes to the same level of professional services. So my administrative assistant, I've hired administrative assistants in the Philippines, in China, and in South America. And in every one of those locations, I would have to pay 5 times what I'm paying for those people for equivalent skill sets. Now, there are ways of managing people so that you get that equivalency, that because not everybody's going to perform at the same level. But I was able to hire somebody for a fraction, and the large corporations have known this for more than 20 years. White collar jobs, high income jobs are being eliminated or being outsourced at an alarming rate. So what do we have to do? How can you take back your life and gain financial freedom? Now, I already did mention downsizing. I take that seriously. I wrote a program about intentional thrift. There's actually a dream being sold to you by media is that you have to have these wealthy things. Of the actual real millionaires or multimillionaires that I've met, they aren't driving around Lamborghinis and wearing designer suits and going to Italy every summer. They are, in fact, driving pickup trucks. They're like the millionaire next door. They're really unassuming. They don't look like millionaires. They might own 1,000 acres of land, and they look like they barely own a quarter acre and a trailer. I knew one guy, he lived near the wealthy neighborhood in a trailer. Now, he drove a classic Mercedes. It was a very nice Mercedes, well taken care of, but that was the nicest car they had. He was intentionally thrifty while he was building his business up, and then I was supporting him in the business development side. And because he was intentionally thrifty, he was able to grow so much faster because a larger percentage of his earnings could be reinvested in passive income, could be reinvested in other additional income streams, could be reinvested in education or the resources necessary to spin off a successful idea. So downsizing, intentional thrift, these things are good for you, even though you're going to have some social pushback. And we can talk about that at another time. But downsizing, it reduces your carbon footprint. It requires less electricity. It might even give you more flexibility. I was chatting with somebody who is a consultant in the UK. Him and his wife are both consultants, and they actually decided to live in a motor coach as there were a lot of COVID restrictions on flying, and they basically could drive to many of their European clients in a motor coach. And they had everything they needed with them. Their kids had already moved out of the house. They had downsized the houses already. And they are now enjoying themselves literally on vacation every weekend. And guess who's paying for it? The clients are paying for it. A client will pay for them to come out to Germany, or to come out to France, or to come out to Spain, and they'll come out for a month. They'll come out for 3 weeks. They'll come out for a week, whatever's appropriate for the client situation. And then ultimately, their income is all going back into the business because they have fixed their expenses very low. Now, you might be saying that you can't do that because you're an employee. Well, we can talk about that. If your W-2 employment is your only income, that's a problem in of itself. You can also make yourself financially and mentally independent through an incremental approach. So what does mentally independent mean? Well, part of that high income trap is believing that you won't be able to find another job. See, you're terrified about the next layoff. You're terrified about the reorg. You're terrified that you might get fired because you believe that you won't be able to find that next opportunity. Now, a mentor of mine said very emphatically to look for a job every month. If you're not doing 1 or 2 interviews every month for your next position, whether it's internally or externally, then you're not preparing yourself for that next opportunity. Now, I failed to do that sometimes. I'll get in a position, I'll have a really good assignment, I'll be very busy on the assignment, and I won't go do those other interviews. because I just feel like everything's in place. Maybe you've been that way. Maybe you're earning more money. You feel great about earning more money, and you've never really realized that you have less buying power. Maybe you don't know about the high income trap because you enjoy your job. You're working longer hours. You're seeing less of your family. But you know what? The job's stimulating and exciting. And sure, you'd like to have a little bit more freedom, but you haven't thought about it. And now that I've mentioned it, you realize that you're like a hamster on a treadmill. You're like a slave with no choices. And by the way, if your work is dictating when you show up and when you leave and what weekends you work, and they're having last minute meetings and fires all the time, then you're no different than a slave in a field picking cotton and getting whooped every so often because you ain't keeping up with the master. My point being is, if you don't take the time to evaluate your situation, you start building up these mental chains, these fears that keep you from looking outside and understanding that opportunity is right there. Finally, you want to know your numbers. You want to know your numbers so that you find the right opportunity. I was working with a client who currently makes about $125,000, and they were offered a $150,000 position, but the $150,000 position required them to move towards a city, and they were all gung-ho. And I said, wait a second. I said, hold up. Wait a second. Let's check the numbers. Well, their $125,000 where they're living in this other city, they'd have to make $165,000 to have an equivalent buying power, because they're, of course, your cost of living goes up, your food, your access, your, the resources in a city are a little bit more expensive. And even though they said, well, that's no problem, I'll commute to the city. It's an hour and a half. Well, I said, look, let's factor in that hour and a half. And what does it mean to your overall earnings? And it turns out that they couldn't do their current job for $150,000 a year. So really, their next position, if they have to move to a city, if they have to go to California, where California has a source of income tax, so that non-residents actually pay an income tax in California, then they're going to have to earn more. So you need to know your numbers. You need to also know, what are your expenses? You maybe you need a housekeeper to save you a little bit of time, but the housekeeper is costing you $600 a month. Maybe you could change that service a little bit. Maybe you could simplify your house so you can get quote the prices out. Maybe you're trying to save money by mowing your grass when you find out it's only $150 a month for have somebody else mow your grass. Frees up 2 or 3 hours of your time. It frees up the necessary equipment. And next thing you know, you can apply that somewhere else in your business. Folks, I've covered a lot here today, and I'm going to give you a few next steps that are really going to get you to where you want to be. First off, I want you to understand that what you're earning today, you feel poor because everything around you have changed. You've changed too. You've improved. You've gained additional experience and skills. But now that you've realized that the money you're making doesn't go as far as you want, the lifestyle you have isn't where you want it to be, we can change that. We can fix that. Now, maybe you fall in the high income trap and you're scared. You're afraid that something's going to happen and you're going to fall. That is great. That's actually not a bad thing, because now you can start developing your plan. And finally, that dream, that fantasy of escape, freedom, and independence, it doesn't have to be a fantasy. You've experienced a little bit with the working from home that it isn't incredibly nice to work at home. Well, if you had the right structure in place, you could have a nice office at home. You could have the work environment. Most professionals that I know, they work over, they could all be sitting in the same office, but they'd still be working with people in other areas because they work for a multinational or they work for somebody who has multiple branches or offices. It should really be your choice whether you're in an office or out of an office. And finally, you can take back your life with the things that we talked about here: downsizing, making yourself mentally and financially independent, and then, of course, knowing your numbers so you take the right opportunities. So the next step is if you have questions about what I've covered here, you want to visit www.sustainablewealthsecrets.com. Go to the Contact tab, contact my offices, send an email, send a fax, send something by mail. I would love to hear from you. I'm Justin Hitt with Sustainable Wealth Secrets. And really your next step is to sit down and just look honestly at your situation. I want you to use accurate thinking. Look honestly at your situation. Are you working so hard to make a living that you're not actually getting to enjoy your life? I have special reports and resources available. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. I also have a free email newsletter that helps high-income professionals keep more of their earnings. Visit me at www.sustainablewealthsecrets. Again, I'm Justin Hitt. Thanks for listening.